How's it going, guys? I'm just outside here, just out on, literally my front yard. Of course, I live just way out in the rural part of the county where I live at, and yeah, this is home. I literally live just a couple of miles from the very place where I grew up, and for me, this is how I like to live. This is how I grew up. Very rural, out in the woods, doing the things that I want to do. And I'm surrounded by people in this community who are the same. It's a very rural community. A lot of agriculture. It's an agricultural community. And this place, just like many, has its own culture, its own way of doing things. And that's what I wanted to talk about in this video, about how that the cultures that we're starting to see across this country are something that there's a growing divide in. As many of y'all know, it's obvious if you watch the news. You're starting to see the political ramblings just from everywhere about the way that one group wants things compared to the way that another group wants things. And for me, I'm very traditional. I've studied history for years. Yeah, in fact, that was one of my majors, one of a couple of them. Believe it or not, for some of you all who don't know, I did go to college. But if you look at the history of our country, you're going to see that the founders were a people who not only wanted to create a new nation, they were people who wanted freedom. They were people who desired freedom above anything else. They did not want to be enslaved to a tyrannical government. And that's why they fought a very long and hard war to win the independence of this country. Since that time, this country has always had one kind of struggle or another, and that's just part of our history. Unfortunately, the things that we see happening today are things that are, I guess you could say, a new way of struggling, a new way of things happening within our country that are very dangerous, in my opinion. And what we see in our country now, we see people in the halls of our own government that we fought wars against, the ideologies that we fought wars against. Many of you, I'm sure, have had family members fight and even die in wars against communism, against fascism, and that sort of thing. And we now see those ideologies sitting in the halls of our own government, and I think that's an absolute tragedy. We see kids being taught not the true history of our country, but fables. The history of our country is nothing like what they're teaching about in schools. I used to hate history when I was a kid, and that was something it did not interest me whatsoever. But I always liked visiting historical places. Anytime we'd take a field trip when I was in school, if it was a historical place, that was somewhere that I wanted to go. And once I got older and actually started reading history and started to see the things in history that were not being taught in school, that's one of the reasons why I fell in love with it. I couldn't get enough. I just love reading it, love learning about it, and there was a big shock factor in a lot of things that I read. And it helped me to understand more about who we are as a people, about the culture that is known as Western civilization, as a lot of times that those courses are called. And I've seen why, for the first time, it was important to study those things. But unfortunately now kids don't get that, and we're seeing an entire generation that is going into ideologies that are dangerous. They're going into these schools. They're being indoctrinated with a bunch of this nonsense, the socialism, modern day fascism, and all that has destroyed nation after nation. And now there is a larger support than ever for a lot of these socialistic policies in our own country than what we could ever imagine. A generation ago, it would never have been thought of at the levels that it is now, but we're seeing a dangerous trend in its growth. And the culture that is developing out of this, if you look at any of these politicians that you hear them talking, it's always the same: very liberal, very socialistic in nature. Just look at the candidates that are running for office. And this channel is primarily a gun channel, but at the same time, you know, this is also a channel that is going to be getting a little bit into some political issues, because guns are a political issue. The majority of the candidates that are currently running for the U.S. president or U.S. presidency, the overwhelming majority of them do not support the Second Amendment. In fact, the majority of them want to do away with it. That's just the reality of it. Just read their policies, listen to them. They want to eliminate it. They don't believe that you have a right to own a firearm. And again, the reason that the Second Amendment was enshrined in our Constitution was for the people to be able to keep their freedoms. The Constitution gives us the ability to protect ourselves, our families, and our freedoms from anyone that threatens them. And out here where I live at, in the area where I live at, guns are very common. You see them everywhere. You can go down to any of my neighbors, there's guns in there. In fact, I don't know of any of the neighbors that I have who do not own a firearm. Most of them multiple. You go to some other places, it's not as common. And that is a growing divide within our country, and we know that. But at the same time, the big danger is we see a lot of these policies from some of these people who are opposed to our right to keep and bear arms growing more and into more and more areas. At the same time, there's also a growing interest in firearms because of a lot of what we see. I've had a lot of new students. I've had a lot of people who are new to firearms, who want to learn about them, come to my classes. And so that is some of the positive things that are happening. But at the same time, what we all need to do, the purpose of this video, is to begin to understand that these changes within our country, these changes within our culture, can be dangerous, and they can themselves threaten the freedoms that we enjoy. That's just a part of what's happening. And it's up to us to be able to protect our freedoms. It's up to us to be able to educate others about the importance of our freedoms. If you look at the history of any country that has moved to full registration, they have also gone to confiscation. And then, of course, genocide usually follows. Not much further after that. It's happened everywhere. Nazi Germany, Russia, Cambodia, you name it. It's just everywhere. We don't need to let that happen in our country. We need to be willing to stand out, to stand up, to speak out, stand up for our rights, to get involved with the political process, go register to vote. You know, let your representatives hear from you. Wherever you're at, you know, of course around here, the representatives here, you know, they can't be anti-firearms, anti-Second Amendment around here. They would be thrown out of office extremely quickly if they were. But in other areas, it's not like that. And it's a struggle between those ideologies. You know, I guess you could say that the right to own a firearm is just one of the many things that highlight some of the cultural differences. Liberal versus conservative, rural versus urban. You know, these are cultural challenges in our country, in our time, that we need to be aware of. Contact your representatives. Let them know your position, that you want them to protect your rights, but at the same time also recognize the fact that it's not just up to them, that it's up to you. You're the one that needs to be active. You're the one that needs to get involved in the political process, and let them know we're not going to put up with some of this nonsense. We'll throw you out of office if you start supporting some of this garbage, some of these nonsense gun control laws. We see the growing divide. We see some states that have passed constitutional carry. There are others that want to move in that direction. But at the same time, on the other side of the coin, we're starting to see more states pass greater restrictions on firearms. It's a complete cultural difference between the two. We're living in a more divided country than we have forever. If you go back and you study the conditions within this country prior to the Civil War, I honestly think that we are more divided now as a nation than we were in the 1860s. If you look at the differences then compared to the differences now, there's a lot harsher feelings, I guess you could say, than what there was then. Even a generation ago, the political parties, you did not see the sharp differences between the parties the way that we do now. These elections that we're going to be coming into here real soon, they're going to be critical. We are basically in an ideological civil war within our country. That's what I truly believe right now. But anyways, guys, just a little bit of a rambling video, something that I wanted to do. What are your thoughts? How do you see the direction of this country heading? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. But guys, it's up to us. Stay vigilant, get involved. You know, it's up to us. If we're not willing to stand up for our freedom, nobody's going to do it for us. Guys, thanks for watching the video. Visit my website at boomsticktactical.com. Check out the links down in the description. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.